Well, to start off, I thought I'd share this poem. It's taken from Ibn Radas al-Sha'riya min al-Badiya. So Ibn Radas's collection of Bedouin poems that was published in the 1950s in Arabic. And I will also read the translation offered by Munira Al-Ghadir in her book Desert Voices, which was published in 2009. And if you're at all interested in Nabati poetry or women's poetry or literary criticism or comparative literature, I highly recommend her book. It's excellent, published by IB Taurus. That's Munira Al-Ghadir's Desert Voices. So I'll read the poem first in English, and then in Arabic, and then in English again. Oh, beloved, I give you my veil in ransom for you. Although its beads are lost, I remember them when we met together behind the camp. Oh, beloved, my eyes are watching over you like a herdsman watching his camels. Ya shokna bihnaki yaftak marjanaha dayin kullahu ilmi biha yomana wayak yom intaharij warra lahilhu ya shoka basa nator yarak riya ilmisalhe lidawdin lahu. Oh, beloved, I give you my veil in ransom for you, although its beads are lost. I remember them when we met together behind the camp. Oh, beloved, my eyes are watching over you like a herdsman watching his camels.
Wow, that's amazing. That is a gorgeous piece of poetry. Well, to our listeners.
That's one that jumped out at
me. Absolutely. To our listeners, welcome to Mostly Harmless. My name is Alan Steele. I'm your host, and my guest today, who you just heard reciting that gorgeous poem, is Dr. Valerie Smitherman, who is a scholar of ancient Greece. Maybe you can be more specific about that. We'll get into that. And you're currently doing sort of comparative studies of ancient Greek and Bedouin or Nabati poetry.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Okay.
So Nabati is the Arabic word. It actually does come from the word Nabatean, and it's not actually related to the actual Nabatean civilization. It's just in Arabic a reference to things that are not part of the settled literary community. These are folk poems, poems by nomadic Bedouin. Traditionally, these would be oral poems, so not even written down. Some of the greatest masters of this art didn't even know how to read or write. But you could say Bedouin poetry in English, that's absolutely fine. So all my degrees are actually in classics. I'm a classicist by training. I did my PhD in Norway. So actually Norway is interesting in that it's the only country that I know of that actually separates Latin and Greek, instead of just lumping them together as classics or classical civilization. So I did my PhD technically in ancient Greek because I worked on Aeschylus's Oresteia. But of course, I'm a classicist and I have a general background in both Latin and Greek literature, although please don't quiz me on Latin literature because I don't know that I do very well.
No worries. So I definitely want to dive into what you're doing now with the Nabati poetry. but I want to start with some of the Greek stuff because I discovered you about a year ago or thereabouts. My friends and I started this book club where we were going back and reading all the classics of Western civilization, starting with the Iliad and the Odyssey. And we went through a bunch of Greek plays, a lot of tragedies and some comedies to lighten the mood up. But one of the things that we read was the Oresteia. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Well, I mean, I say Oresteia.
Okay.
You can say Oresteia.
If you say it, then that's fine. I'll go with that. So the Oresteia, which is this trilogy of plays, and it was very interesting to me because the first two plays seemed sort of like your standard, I don't know if standard's the right word, but fairly normal Greek tragedy, drama, lots of people killing each other, and the gods are there. And then the third play, really the second part of the third play, it suddenly turns into like this episode of Law and Order, where you have this big court case. And when I read that, I knew there was something interesting there that I couldn't really figure it out. I didn't really understand it. So before my friends and I met to discuss this, I was Googling on the internet to make myself sound smarter and trying to find some interpretation of this that made sense. And nothing that I found really satisfied me that much. And then by pure chance, about 2-3 weeks later, I stumbled across your tweets. And you were tweeting about the Eumenides, this third play. You're tweeting about the Oresteia, and you were making a lot of sense, and you had this very nuanced perspective on it. So that's a big reason that I wanted to talk to you today, is just to understand that play in particular, what was going on there, and in particular these characters, the Erinyes and the Eumenides, what the play is named after. So maybe if you can start there.
Okay, well, I'm so happy to hear that, because I love talking about Eumenides. I love Eumenides. I have actually only ever written on Eumenides, not counting this new project that I'm working on, but I haven't published anything from the new project yet. I started out with Eumenides when I was an exchange student in my third year of college. I went to Oxford, to University College Oxford, and I went to all the tragedy lectures Oliver Taplin gave, and I knew, just like you, okay, there's something here that I need to explore, because it's not just this court scene. And so I wrote my undergraduate thesis on it, I wrote my master's thesis on it, I wrote a PhD on it, and I really need to rewrite the PhD, but I think I know what I want to say now. So I'm happy, very happy to talk about Eumenides. Just by way of introduction, for anybody who might be listening later, the Eumenides is the third play of this tragic trilogy that we call the Oresteia. The first play is the Agamemnon, and that tells the story of Agamemnon's homecoming from Troy. So Agamemnon's been gone for 10 years, and during that time, his wife, the much smarter Clytemnestra, has been ruling in his place, and she has also been planning to kill him because he sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia in order to set sail to go to Troy. And she's never forgiven him, what mother would. So he returns home, and she lures him into the palace. She persuades him to step on the priceless purple cloth as he goes into the palace, and lures him to his death. In the second play, which in Greek is called Koiphri, and in English we would say libation bearers, this is the story of Orestes, their son, coming back from exile because Clytemnestra had sent him away to be raised by an ally so that he wouldn't be able to interfere with any of her plans. And he and his sister Electra are reunited. They summon the ghost of Agamemnon, and Orestes murders his mother in revenge for her murder of his father Agamemnon. At the end of the play, we see that Orestes is being pursued by the Erinyes. Now, who are the Erinyes? In the Latin tradition, they're called the Furies, but actually the Roman Furies and the Greek Erinyes are a little bit different. So I will call them the Erinyes. I will not call them the Furies, but they are a group of goddesses that predate the Olympian gods. They live in the underworld. They're chthonic deities, and they represent, or they are the avengers of people who no longer have someone to avenge them alive on Earth. So if you are murdered and you have no family and no friends, the Greek religion says the Erinyes will come and avenge you. They will torture the person who killed you. Now, in Eumenides, the first thing we see is we see the Pythia, Apollo's prophetess at Delphi, give a blessing and tell the story of how she inherited her prophetic throne. But then she sees these sleeping Erinyes there in this holy place, and she's just completely stunned. She is so frightened and horrified by what she's seen that she can't even walk upright. She's crawling out of fear. So right away we know that this is not, as you say, a normal tragedy. We don't have a normal exposition. We don't have the chorus like we have in the Agamemnon telling the audience the story of everything that has happened up until that point. We don't really know what's going on because the Pythia can't explain to us who the Erinyes are. She can hardly explain how they look. It's just like, imagine, you saw the most terrifying thing in your nightmare. You woke up and you're screaming and someone says, well, what did you see? It's really hard to say, isn't it? So that's where we start in Eumenides, and that's...
So let me stop you right there for a second, because so the story of Orestes, of this Orestes killing Agamemnon, this is not just in Aeschylus's plays, right? Sophocles writes about it, and Euripides writes about it. So it's this sort of common story. But then this third play in the trilogy, suddenly it goes off in this completely new direction. Is that a fair assessment of it, or?
Yes, that is a very good point. That's true. So these stories, these myths, are part of a larger epic cycle of myths. They would have been generally known by everyone coming to the Great Dionysia to see these plays. And we do have other treatments of these stories, for example, by Euripides. Euripides' Orestes also deals with the question of Orestes being pursued by the Erinyes. And Euripides' approach is very modern in that his depiction is of a man driven to paranoia. So the Erinyes exists in his mind. It's sort of a mental affliction. It's the way perhaps us modern people would conceive of something like this happening. So if you do something like commit a murder, you might be tortured with guilt and doubt and nightmares. So this is what Euripides shows us. But Aeschylus has a particular take on this, and the trial does have some precedent in myth, but it's really defined by Aeschylus. He takes this sort of notion of the Areopagus and he reforms it as well. So he makes the Areopagus into sort of a proto-democratic court, which has connections to the current events at the time. When the Oresteia premiered in 458 BC, Athens had just seen the murder of Ephialtes, and there were moves to democratize the Areopagus court, which had at first had, oh gosh, I don't know if I remember all of the details here, but essentially the Areopagus court there was a move to make it purely a homicide court instead of just a general decision-making entity, and to integrate it within the democratic polis that way. And so Aeschylus gives this sort of a mythic etiology, right? So he's saying, okay, in mythic time, when Orestes was here, this is how this court functioned, which was not something that previously existed in the common myth, but it was something that was modeled into this play in order to give these new changes a mythic history, right? A stamp of...
That's super interesting, because one thing that struck me about the whole court scene is how much it resembles a sort of modern court. You know, you have a defendant and the prosecution, and if I remember correctly, you have a sort of a jury, which is then split, and it struck me that this connection to when was this written? 2,500 years ago. It's almost exactly like our courts of today. So that's interesting that he's sort of starting that by framing it in this mythical perspective. Right.
So what he's framing in the mythical perspective is the Areopagus court specifically is a homicide court.
I see.
The court itself is a Greek court, more or less, although, it's not right down to the letter exactly how court proceedings would have been done, obviously, and we have better evidence for how court proceedings would have been done from the orators, for example, Lysias. So there is poetic license in there, as you'd expect. The question of the jury is one that is very fraught in the literature, because we're not exactly sure how many people were in the jury. And so there's a question of, did the human jury vote to condemn Orestes? That is, did the humans vote for him to be killed? And did Athena cast her vote, tipping the scales, and basically say, I'm the representative of Zeus. I don't want Orestes to be killed, so I'm going to make sure that my will and Zeus's will prevails here? Or did the votes of the human jurors, were they split? And did Athena's vote basically break the tie? So there are different interpretations of that, and people come to different conclusions based on how they want to say the different lines as the jurors go to vote. When the Erinyes and Apollo are throwing insults back at each other, they can count the lines and say, okay, this would have been enough time for one juror to go and put his pebble in the amphora, so on and so forth.
That's super interesting. I mean, because one of the things that struck me about reading a lot of these, especially Homer, actually reading a lot of these ancient Greek stories, is it was really hard for me to tell how much the writing was speaking about a physical God that was really there, and how much is sort of metaphorical. And especially in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you have these moments where Athena appears in the disguise of someone else that really exists, and I start to wonder, is this just a way of referring to this is the voice of wisdom, basically? This is a wise counsel, or do they really mean this is Athena, the goddess in disguise, that she's transformed? So it's interesting that you brought up, you said that thing about, I think it was Euripides' treatment of the Furies as being more sort of psychological,
Right.
metaphorical.
Exactly. Yeah. In Orestes' mind. Well, gosh, you make me feel like I should have done more homework and not just gone off memory with this. You're bringing up a lot of interesting points, which a lot of scholars have written about extensively. I'm not going to cite very many things by name because I don't want to get any of the details a little bit wrong.
No,
But
I mean,
I
we can
will
stay
say,
more focused on the Eumenides play.
No. This is great. You're bringing up really, really good points here. In terms of the depictions of the gods in epic, I think we can't really say, what did they mean, because we're talking about a tradition that could have stretched back thousands and thousands of years, and so many different audiences, right? And if we look at, for example, the way Cicero wrote about religion and De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things, he and his friends who were trying to make sense of, or clean up, if you like, the ancient Greek and Roman religion, they did sort of see depictions of gods as metaphorical, the voice of wisdom, a moment of inspiration, a moment of strength, or a moment where something happened that we couldn't quite explain, but anyway, there you go. Plato does this to a certain degree as well. He in the dialogues, there's a lot of discussion about, if the gods are good, can they really do the things that we see them do in Homer? Can they cheat on each other? Can they lie to each other? Can they break familial bonds? And this is something that intellectuals in that culture were thinking about over quite a long period of time. But I think in terms of, if we look at epic poetry at its core, it's a communal performance, and one of the main purposes of it was entertainment, right? Especially with the Odyssey. I mean, the Odyssey, if you look at it from different literary perspectives, at least some critics would say it comes up rather short. It's really just an adventure story. I mean, there are lessons there. Odysseus is clearly a complex character. He's not just a cardboard cutout, but there are elements that are unexplored. Telemachus isn't really a very well-developed character. He is a little bit wooden, I think. It's an adventure story. It's meant to be fantastic and amazing, and it's meant to hold your attention and make you wonder, is he really going to survive this time? What on earth is happening here? So the Iliad too. And if we look at the Iliad as a whole, there are sort of comedic breaks in it, right? Like at the end of book 1, we see the gods feasting together, having fun. So, these are very long performances. They would have been broken up over nights and nights. There are different characters to different parts of them, but I do think at a basic level, if you're talking about what a general audience might have thought once they'd heard this, that the gods physically exist and are present in that world. For example, there's a scene in Iliad 3 where the Greeks and the Trojans are getting tired of this fighting, and they really want to be able to tie this up and get back to life as usual. So there's this idea, okay, why don't we have Menelaus and Paris fight man to man? Whoever wins gets to keep Helen. Pretty simple stuff. And this is proposed by the Greeks and accepted by the Trojans. The Greeks propose it, of course, because everybody knows Menelaus is a formidable warrior and Paris is not. He is a beautiful boy, but he is not a formidable warrior. So the Greeks are like, well, this will be an easy solution. You know, our men are tired. They want to go home. Menelaus will beat this guy. We can pack this in, go home. It'll be great. So they set this up. Paris agrees. In a way, he has to agree. Otherwise, his honor is at stake. And so Helen goes out to the ramparts and she looks down and she sees all these Greek soldiers she knew very well. She welcomed into her palace when she was Menelaus's wife. She's very conflicted about all of this because according to different readings of the Iliad, you know, she herself didn't fully choose to run away with Paris because this was a design of the gods. So she wasn't fully in control of herself. So she is conflicted there. And it's not like she hates them or hates Menelaus. She doesn't. So she's obviously very nervous, though, because she cares about Paris and she knows, having been married to Menelaus, that he's no match for him. The fight starts, the combat begins, and very soon Paris is enveloped in this magical mist and brought back up into the palace because Aphrodite saw him get wounded. And she decided, okay, this is not going to happen. The human beings are not going to have the power to shortcut our plans. So I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to rescue Paris and ensure that the war goes on for as long as it's supposed to go on, for as long as fate decreed. When she does this, after she rescues Paris, she corners Helen. And she appears not as a beautiful goddess, but as an old crone. She's very menacing and has this very stern look on her face. And she says, "Don't try to cross me. I can destroy you. Don't try to circumvent your portion. You know, you are supposed to suffer for this. I gave you this. You are the most beautiful woman in the world, but on the other hand, you also have to go through this. There's no shortcuts. You have to do this." And it's not really, I mean, the dramatic moment would be lost if we thought, you know, this was a voice in Helen's head. This is not a thought that she wants to have. This is not a person she wants to see. She's not expecting to see her there on the ramparts. She's looking around like everybody else, wondering where Paris went. He just disappeared.
Right. So I just want to stop you there. There's so many threads that I want to extract from that. First, this idea of fate, because that's another thing that stood out to me. I know it's just staying on the Homeric stories, that there is this concept of fate, that this has to happen, but it's almost as if the gods have to make sure that it happens. Like it's not going to happen otherwise. They need to make sure that it happens.
I'm already raising my hand.
Please.
Okay. So, I have a lot to say about this. Just to make a note, I'd like to circle back at some point and talk about the vote.
Absolutely, yeah. We can get back to that. I don't
think I wrapped that up. Just so I noted that. Okay, so fate. I'm American. I'm an academic, but I'm not an American academic. I did my undergraduate degree in America, but then I went to Oxford And I went to Oxford first as an exchange student in my junior year, and then I loved it so much, and Oxford convinced me that what I really wanted to do with my life was be a classicist. So I went back and I did an MPhil there. So some of the things I do and some of the approaches I take are going to be very Oxfordian, because essentially that's who and what I am. There was a lot of Oxford influence in my department in Bergen as well, which is a different story. So my scholarly environment is that one. And when I was when I was an exchange student, we were very strongly discouraged from using the English word fate when we wrote about these questions in epic, and particularly in the Iliad. The Greek word is moira, or in the modern pronunciation, mira, which means portion or lot. So the reason why our tutors didn't want us to use fate was because they felt that in English that has this very strong deterministic sense. Whereas in Greek, there is a little bit of a notion of, okay, these are the things you get to work with. But there's still some scope for individual freedom or individual choice within that portion that you get. You decide what to make of it. It's not just every single step of your life is predetermined, and no matter what you do, what you say, what you think, it's going to happen that way. When you say that there is a sense that the gods have to make it happen, that is a very good instinct, because actually we see in the Iliad, for example, Zeus himself, king of the gods, is bound by Moira because his son, Sarpedon, by a mortal woman, Trojan woman, is fighting with the other soldiers at Troy, and his thread spins out, right? His time is up. And Zeus knows this. And he's looking down and he's watching the battle, and he knows his son Sarpedon is about to die. Now, he's Zeus. He could just take a thunderbolt and throw it down there and just and save him, right? The way Aphrodite saved Paris? No, he can't. And that is the point of that scene. He cannot do anything. He himself is bound by Moira. There is a notion in the Greek religion that there are limits within the universe, within the structure of the universe, that must be maintained. For example, there's a fragment of Heraclitus in which Heraclitus says, the Erinyes keep the sun to his track so that he doesn't, because he's a chariot, right? So that he doesn't go off the rails. The Erinyes are there to guide him, to keep him on his track. So there is a notion that there are these limits in the universe that even supernatural beings are subject to. So when Zeus's son Sarpedon does die, he falls in battle. His comrades realize that he's dead. They pick up his body. They're carrying it off to prepare it for burial. And there are drops of blood that fall from the sky as rain. And this is a sign of Zeus' grief for his son. He can do that. Right. He can break some of the laws of nature and cause a freak natural event to show someone exceptional has died. But he can't save his life, because human life is necessarily limited. So too, look at the story of Achilles. Achilles is the son of the sea nymph Thetis and the human king Peleus. And Peleus was given Thetis as a wife because there's a prophecy that said she will bear a son greater than his father. So Zeus did not want to mess with her. So he gave her to a human man. And when it's clear that the war in Troy is coming, Achilles is visited by his mother Thetis, who tells him, you have two paths in front of you. You can either stay home, choose to not join Menelaus and Agamemnon in their war. You will live a long life, you will marry, you will have many children, you will be a beloved king, a good king, and you will die an old man in your bed. Or you can choose to take the Myrmidons to Troy to fight with Agamemnon and Menelaus, and you will live a very short life, but your exploits will be remembered forever. And so Achilles obviously chooses to be remembered forever, to win for himself atheton kleos, undying glory. Now, this is a really interesting point because Achilles is semi-divine, he can get some knowledge from his mother, who has that larger perspective on the world and how it works. But he can't escape being human. But he can see that, okay, he has a moira, he has a portion. He can choose how to live. Does he want to live a long, happy, and safe life, or does he want to live a brief, renowned life as a great warrior? Now, human beings on their own, we don't necessarily have that global view of what we could do, the options in front of us. But the Greek idea is that, in fact, there are these different paths that you can take within your moira. So it's not purely deterministic.
Right. So the gods, as powerful as they may be, and they can make lots of decisions, but they still have to kind of go with these rules that are there in the background. So one thing that I was thinking about as you're speaking is, in my mind, because ancient Greece is so long ago, that I kind of conflate all the Greek stories, and this is all one period in my mind, when really it's hundreds of years. And as you're saying with the Homeric stories, that maybe they're traditions going back thousands of years, it's this long time period. And even in the myths, you have the sort of the classic pantheon, but then you have these older beings before that the more powerful, the newer gods are still beholden to, in a way. And so that's like the Erinyes. And then as you're speaking about Moira, you have the Moirai, right? The three fates. Mm-hmm. So it's to kind of bring things back a little bit to Eumenides and the Erinyes. I'm wondering maybe there's no connection here, but you said that, Aphrodite, when she appears to Helen, she appears as an old crone. And then you have these three sisters, the Erinyia, and you have the three Moirai, and you also have this triple goddess, sort of, who is it? I can't remember the Greek name now, but Diana and Hecate, and the triple moon goddess. And
yes.
So you have these three women, three powerful women that kind of appear in different variations, in different myths, sometimes as young maidens, sometimes as old crones. And that's a really powerful sort of trope that's come into folklore. I don't know, is there a connection to the Erinyes with that?
Well, sort of. So we don't know how many Erinyes there really are.
Okay. For some reason, I had the number 3 in my head, but
it's a very neat idea. But we know that in the play Eumenides, the Erinyes are the chorus, so there are probably about 10 of them.
I see.
On stage for Aeschylus purposes. In earlier myths, the descriptions of them are very vague. Sorry. So we don't know exactly how many of them exist. We know there are a group of them. But you are right that these groups of primordial female beings do have these deep connections to the boundaries of the universe, to a concept in Greek called dike. And dike means law or custom. It's usually, at least in terms of Eumenides and the Oresteia, translated also as justice. But I don't like that translation. I wrote a paper on why I didn't like that translation, but I never did anything with it because it got rejected a couple of times, and then I had to go and find a job. But I still have all the notes on it, and I should probably come back to it, because you are not the first person who has, since we've all landed in quarantine, asked me about this. So maybe the universe is telling me to pick it back up.
Sorry, just to bring it to the Irenaeus then, and this idea of, there are these sort of older beings that you can't contravene. That makes it really interesting then, because the whole point of that play is Athena saying, Athena's, even in the classic pantheon, she's sort of one of the newer ones, and she's saying, look, we have to come up with a different system here. Like, this classic, vengeance quest that you have to go through with this. Maybe we can come up with something else, some other system.
Well, yes, that is what's going on, and that's what causes critics of the play to really find it to be difficult and disturbing and ultimately unsatisfying. The usual criticism of Eumenides is that it's just a whitewash and it's a way of propping up a patriarchal system, and Athena just comes in there as a deus ex machina. Okay, I'm going to fix the problem. Bing! And everybody's unhappy, and the Irenaeus are unhappy, and the jury is unhappy, but no one can contravene Athena because she was born from the head of Zeus and she has the direct authority of Zeus. And it's just sort of a put-up job. But I reject that interpretation for a number of reasons. To get back to layers of gods and layers of divine authority, Hesiod tells us in the Theogony that the Irenaeus were born from the drops of blood shed by the severed member of Uranos when Zeus overthrows his father, right? He has to castrate him. And he throws what's left there into the sea, and the blood that drips from it engenders, creates, gives rise to the Irenaeus. So they were born from this first act of familial violence, and they are summoned when someone violates familial bonds or social bonds like that. So in a way, yes, they are older than Athena. They are older than the order of Zeus. They are older than the order of Olympus, and they claim their rights, and they will have their rights respected. So depending on how you see the vote of the jury, some critics, including my advisor, my PhD, he sees the vote of the jury as a majority to sentence Orestes to death, to say that he is guilty indeed of the murder of his mother and that he should be punished for it. There are other critics, including Alan Sommerstein, whom I follow, who make a convincing case, I think, that the votes of the human jurors are actually divided, right? So we don't have a majority for guilt or innocence, and so the vote of Athena.
Let me just stop you really quick. Can you just lay out what the court case is, just so that everyone listening has an idea of what, sort of imagine what it looks like? Yeah.
Okay. So basically, in Eumenides, what we see at the very beginning, right, the Pythia is terrified. She sees these creatures in her shrine, which is supposed to be a pure and holy place, and they say these creatures are not pure, they are not holy, they are disgusting, they are black, they wheeze smoke, they don't belong in a clean, holy place. And then we see Orestes and Apollo. Apollo is firing arrows at them and telling them to get out. This is after they've woken up and said, oh gosh, where are we? And Apollo basically sets forth that he has taken Orestes to his shrine at Delphi personally in order to purify him of blood guilt for the murder of his mother. And then they look around, they realize the Erinyes are still there, right? Like a pack of hunting dogs, basically. That's how they're described in the text. And they haven't gone away, and they won't go away, and they don't listen to Apollo when he tells them to go away. And so he says, okay, I can't solve this problem, but I bet my sister Athena can. You should go to Athens and make supplication at her statue on the Acropolis, and she will come to your aid. She'll sort this out. So Orestes and Apollo go to Athens. He supplicates Athena, makes supplication to Athena. He says, I'm not polluted. I have already been purified at Delphi. I have communicated with other people, because if you've murdered someone in the ancient Greek religion, before you're purified, you can't take part in any sort of communal life. You can't share food or drink with other people. You can't be in temples. You can't, basically, you carry that blood guilt. So that's a physical pollution, and you have to avoid everyone because of that. So he says, I don't have that. That's worn off through my travels and my associations with others. And Apollo took me to Delphi, but these Erinyes, they're still following me, and I don't know what to do. And the Erinyes have a whole choral song where they tell Orestes at this point, we are going to sing a song that will bind your mind and drive you mad. And once you're mad, we're going to take you down to the underworld and torture you for all eternity, because that's what you deserve. And that's our job. But the interesting thing about that is that after having heard this song, he doesn't go mad. So we're in this kind of limbo, right? Where the Erinyes say, I have this power. They try to exercise it. It doesn't really work. Apollo says, I have the power to purify Orestes. He tries to do that. It doesn't exactly work. And then Athena comes on stage and says, wow, this is a really difficult problem. I can't solve it on my own. I am going to summon the best of my citizens, and we're going to convene a trial, and there's going to be a jury of Athenians, and that's how we're going to solve this problem. So Athena, and this is extremely significant, does not just use her divine authority and says, okay, problem solved. Right. She does not do that at all. She instead backs up and says, we are going to establish this trial. So in this, to tie it back to the political events I mentioned, Aeschylus is creating a scene where Athena is giving an etiology, so a divine story, a founding myth behind the Areopagus court, specifically as a court for deciding homicide cases. So this is established by Athena. This gives it a great deal of significance. In the trial, Apollo is, you could say, Orestes' lawyer, and he comes up with this very tortured defense because he can't deny that Orestes killed his mother. Orestes admits it. And then once he does that, the Erinyes are like, well, we've won now, let's go home. But Apollo comes up with this very odd story of how the mother is not the true parent. She's just like a greenhouse, right? She's not a parent. So only the father's the parent. The mother's just a vessel. So killing the mother doesn't really matter. He didn't kill an immediate family member. He shouldn't be held to this penalty. The Erinyes think that this is laughable. Most critics think that this is laughable. It's very difficult to take Apollo seriously. And a lot of modern critics, particularly starting in the 1970s, they did take Apollo seriously, and they said, this is not meant as anything other than an absolutely serious defense of patriarchy. This is the ultimate devaluation of the mother. And this is meant to be taken completely seriously. I don't know about that. I mean, of course, there are people who would believe strange scientific theories. We have them even today in our world. But I don't know to what degree that is the important question in the trial scene. Because if we look at Athena's final statement, she doesn't address the details of Apollo's defense at all. At all. She just ignores it. And I think that's extremely significant. I think that's a sign that, maybe it's an exaggeration. It's Apollo trying to be very smart, very clever, very flashy, as he so often does, but it falls flat, as Apollo so often does.
Is there significance to, I mean, this is being told, this trilogy, this is being told in Athens, right? And
it's moved to Athens for Eumenides, yes.
No, I mean when the play was written. This is
for the Great Dionysia in Athens, yes.
Right. Okay. So there's this tradition of Athena as being maybe more important, or she's got a special significance to them. Is there a significance to maybe the fact that Apollo is ineffective earlier in the story, that he tries to get rid of the Erinyes and it doesn't seem to really have an effect?
Well, I think there is. Obviously, the critics who would say that Apollo is extremely important in this story and that his defense is meant to be taken absolutely genuinely and absolutely seriously, they don't see him as ineffective. But I do, and I do because even though he claims that Orestes is purified and has done nothing wrong, the Erinyes are still there. And the only thing that Apollo does when he interacts with the Erinyes is insult them. He says horrible, horrible things about them. He says, you are from a former age, you're from a time where people were tortured and castrated, and you have no place in the enlightened world of the Olympians. I am the god of music, I am the god of enlightenment, and you are the representation of everything that's dark and backwards and awful, and you smell bad, go away. He says all these things, and I'm not making any of it up. There is a marked contrast between that and the way Athena addresses the Erinyes. Athena, she casts her vote, which I believe is a tie-breaking vote. That's my view. I follow Sommerstein in this. I believe it's a tie-breaking vote. So I believe that the human jurors didn't know what to do with Orestes. And Athena's vote is counted, and it tips the scales to acquittal. Obviously, there are other critics who, for also fairly good reasons, believe that the human jury voted to declare that Orestes is guilty, and that Athena's vote instead basically says, okay, look, it changes the result, and Orestes is acquitted, but against, it is implied, it's never explicitly stated in the text, otherwise we wouldn't have this debate, right? It's implied that Athena's vote contramands the will of the human jurors. I don't see this because of the way that I interpret everything that happens after the vote. But you don't have to agree with me. This is part of the magic of reading literature. I hope that by the end, though, you will consider my point of view, which is also Alan Summerstein's point of view, and to a certain extent Richard Seaford's point of view. So there are many more illustrious people who have a similar point of view to mine. I see Eumenides as fundamentally a very inspiring and hopeful play. I don't see it as a put-up job, and the reason for that is what Athena does after she votes. She says, I've cast my vote because I have a father, so I don't have a mother. I don't know anything about that relationship. I don't know. So she's not commenting on men versus women or mothers versus fathers, because she says, I don't know what it's like to have a mother. I don't have a mother. And then she says, I will value more, protimao, I will value more the death of a domaton episkopon. So that means the overseer of a household. This is not a term that refers to sex. I mean, of course, in ancient Greek society, a domaton episkopon is most likely a man, because although women oversaw many household tasks and in fact ran farms and other internal things like the production of cloth and the making of clothing and production of certain sorts of food, women didn't have public lives, right? They didn't vote, they didn't participate in public democracy. But I still think it's significant that Athena does not use a term that specifically referenced sex. She's referring to an individual in terms of the function the individual serves in that society. So
right, she's not saying I value the father more. She's saying
right,
this specific,
the person with this job,
right,
the person upon whom other people depend, right? Because Athena, and you mentioned very rightly her connection with Athens. She is the patron goddess of Athens. She is a goddess associated with wisdom, and she's also associated with order and the maintenance of good order. And so what she's saying here is she's making a case for order. I value more the death of someone upon whom other people depended, upon whom a small economy depended, than I do the death of a woman who killed her husband. So that's what she says. And it's not, I value a man more than a woman. You notice the terms she used are very specifically qualified in the text. It's a domaton episkopon, an overseer of a household, not a man, and then not just a woman, any woman, gune, it's a woman who killed her husband. So a woman who had already violated those close familial bonds.
right.
So that's how she qualifies it. And I don't see that as an out and out defense of patriarchy. Partly, mostly because of what she says afterwards. So she makes this proclamation. She says, Orestes, you're acquitted. Everyone will know this. You are free to go back home to Argos and accede to your father's throne and rule Argos. And, I wish you all the best. And Orestes says, we will never forget you and the things you have done. Athena, we will always honor you. And there will always be a relationship, a friendship between Athens and Argos, which some people take as a reference to a treaty that was currently being negotiated at the time the Oresteia premiered. And then Orestes and Apollo leave. Did you notice something? Did we hear anything from Apollo?
Oh, right.
No, we didn't. We only heard from Orestes thanking Athena and mentioning that Athens and Argos will be forever friends, essentially. We hear nothing from the great loudmouth, who started out the play insulting the chorus, making all these proclamations. I'll fix it. I'll make it all better. And he slinks off the stage. He says nothing. And if you want to have a fun time, you can read Taplin's book on silences in Greek tragedy. Silences and changes of scene are very significant. Very, very significant in tragedy as a genre. And the fact that Apollo says nothing is something that so many critics gloss over. And I ask you, if this is a patriarchal ending, if this is an ending that holds up Apollo and his very strange idea of human reproduction and all of that as a correct view, then don't you think he might have said something like, oh, I'm the best lawyer. Look, Orestes, I got you out of this. Well, this is great. Let's go get you back to Argos, and I'll go back to Delphi, and everything will be great. You'd expect that. I'd expect that.
Right, you'd expect some kind of long, bloviating speech about
exactly how great he is and how effective he was.
Instead, you get Athena venerating the Erinyes, and she gives them this new name. Sort of saying like, yeah, by the way, your claim was still, I need to respect this claim still. So I don't know. Do you want to just
yes, absolutely.
go with the very ending there?
No,
Yeah.
You are so right in all of your senses of this play. The fact is, Apollo slinks off stage. He says nothing. We don't hear from him ever again. He never comes back. And at the very least, even if you say, Eumenides is a patriarchal proclamation, there are some passages that I think show that to an extent. There are reasons why people have different points of view when it comes to this play, but I think the fact that Apollo says nothing is extremely significant. And I think that the fact that Athena says nothing about Apollo's method of defending Orestes is also extremely significant. So I think these silences are ways of invalidating Apollo's approach, which is basically to ignore and insult and bluster his way through. I think we see Athena take the stage, and she's instead a negotiator, and she's extremely diplomatic. The Erinyes are understandably extremely upset. They've watched all this happen. They've seen Orestes, they see him as their prey, right? They're the hunting dogs, and he's the prey, the rabbit. And they've seen him run off, and they're just so angry. And they say, our rights have been violated. The younger gods are run roughshod over us. We are not being respected. Oh, sisters, what are we going to do? And they are so upset. And Athena says, oh, please don't be upset. There were reasons for this. We had to make this decision. It was a hard decision, but it's not meant to dishonor you. What do you mean it's not meant to dishonor us? You've taken our prey from us. He belongs to us. This is our right. We've got one job, right? Otherwise, we have to live in the underworld. We've got this one job. We come up here, we do this one job, and this is what we get. And now you're telling us not to be mad. That's not going to happen. In fact, you know what? We could punish Athens. There could be a plague. The children could die. The crops could die. It's not just that we're angry. We're not going to go quietly, they say. Athena's got a serious problem on her hands. What is she going to do? Well, what she does is, I think, the key to understanding the whole trilogy, and this is the point of my PhD thesis. She offers them something. She offers them a home. And she offers them cult worship in Athens. So she says, please, don't be upset. Don't be insulted. I honor you. I respect you. I respect you as my elders in this universe. And I want you to stay in my city and protect my citizens and guide them in the way that they should go. And if you stay, it'll be great. The Iranians are very cautious. They're just, because they are not worshipped as cultic deities. And in fact, they have really sketchy evidence in terms of whether or not they were worshipped at all. It's extremely unclear. The ghost of Clytemnestra, who does appear at the beginning of Eumenides, as you remember, she says, why are you sleeping? I stayed up nights and I poured out the dark offerings to you and only you, so that you would be my champions, you would protect me. And here I come from the underworld because you're sleeping and you're letting my murderer get away, she says at the beginning of the play. While they're sleeping, and Orestes and Apollo have started off to Athens. So it's that speech of the ghost of Clytemnestra hints to us that in fact these chthonic deities were worshipped. They were worshipped at night. Maybe there were private rituals that people did to hope that they might be avenged in death, or possibly to wish death on someone, but it's very unclear. The Erinyes don't really know what this means, and so they say, okay, you say this is such a good deal, tell us more about it. What's the deal? And Athena says, I will give you the ability to bless my citizens, and in return, I will order them to pay you tribute of the first fruits and to establish a festival for you. So if you give them good things, they will give you good things and honor you in return, and they will never forget you, and they will always honor you. And the Erinyes are intrigued by this. And then they say, well, what kind of song shall we sing? And Athena tells them, a song of blessing, a song that will ensure good winds on the sea and fresh fruits on the earth and many children to the families of Athens, all these blessings that we hope for even today. No sickness in our city, only health. And then you know what the Erinyes do? They sing that song of blessing. That's the end of the play, not the vote.
Right.
At the trial, the end of the play is the Erinyes singing the song of blessing that Athena outlined for them, and being welcomed into the city of Athens as resident aliens, as metoi koi, and they are given the robes of metoi koi. So they're being fully welcomed into this community. Now, why is this so significant? Well, the Erinyes are a chorus. Now, they're a very strange chorus because they don't do the normal things that we expect choruses to do, and they don't sing the way we expect choruses to sing. Their defining song, which is the song they sing when they see Orestes in Athens, they finally catch up to him, and they say, you are our victim, you belong to us. We will sing a song to bind your mind to drive you insane, right? So that brings you back to the image of Euripides Orestes, who is dealing with this, if you like, within his own mind. So we don't see this exchange, but it's sort of the same experience.
Psychological torment.
Right.
Right.
It's psychological torment instead of the performance of the song. But if you look structurally at the binding song, it's not a unified, harmonious, normal song. The meter is all messed up. The parts don't really fit together. I saw it performed once in Oxford. They did Eumenides for the Greek play a couple years back, and I think they did a fantastic job of performing the binding song, because they had different elements of the chorus shouting and singing at different times, and it was just this overwhelmingly awful experience to sit there in the audience. So it's not the performance that we expect. Now, they do sing a more unified song when they are explaining their role in the cosmos to Athena a little bit later on in the play, just before the trial. So it's not that everything they sing is quite that exaggeratedly insane.
Right.
But even when they can pull themselves into a musical structure that we can identify from the text that's somewhat coherent, they are singing about punishment. They're singing about how the man who violates the law by killing his brother and stealing or doing something wrong, he may hide his guilt to other men, but we will always see him. He will be punished. He will be pulled under by the currents of the sea. He will drown forever. His memory
horrific stuff. Right.
It's just, if you do something wrong, we're watching you, and we're going to make sure that you don't prosper. You're not going to be remembered forever. You're not going to be honored by your family. You're going to be punished, and you're going to sink into the mist, into the blackness, and be forgotten, which is, of course, the worst thing that can happen, right? Because that affects what happens after you die. You're not even remembered. You're nothing. You're nothing. And that's what the Erinyes say. When they pull themselves together to sing coherently about their jobs, this is not a song you want to hear. It's a dark song. It's true, in a way, it tells you something about the structure of this universe, that wrongdoers like that should be punished. But it's not a song that we want to hear as people. It's only threatening. Here at the end, we see the Erinyes singing a song of blessing, and they use the verb in Greek to sing, hymnome. So how is this possible? Well, the core of my thesis is essentially that unified choral song like that, positive unified choral song, is only possible in a reciprocal social relationship. So a true grounded communal relationship. You cannot be a chorus by yourself. You cannot perform by yourself. If you are isolated from a community for some reason, then you cannot do this. You cannot recreate a community on your own. The Erinyes are special in that it's not that they're isolated from a community per se, it's that they were never part of it. They even say in the play themselves, we predate you, right? We are your elders, but we are never included in your feasts. We're never invited to Olympus. We're never we've never been part of your society of Olympians, they say to Athena. So they've just, been left behind. It's not as if they've done something or Zeus has decided, I don't want you guys around. It's just that because of the way the universe developed and because of the way that Zeus seized power, they just sort of remained peripheral. So they're there, establishing these very basic boundaries. Don't violate familial relationships. Don't kill people in your family. Don't break an oath if you swear an oath. But they're not really brought into this larger family of Olympians. And Athena, by offering them a home in Athens, accomplishes that. She brings them into a society. She brings them into a positive relationship with human beings. So it's not just that they can punish people if they violate these laws that the Erinyes have always done, right? It's also that if these people honor them and respect them and give them sacrifices and keep to their rules, and they honor their familial relationships, and they honor their oaths, and they honor those commitments, then they can be blessed by the Erinyes. And this was a power they didn't have before. And my contention is they didn't have it before because they weren't part of a community.
It's a beautiful message. I mean, one thing which I'm thinking about is, right, they're called the Erinyes, but then the name of the play is Eumenides, which means, I think, it's the kindly ones, right? And you have this tradition. I don't know much about this. You tell me, but I think you have this tradition of renaming sort of negative things and kind of reclaiming them, calling them something positive, like Pluton, the rich one for Hades. You have these names. The importance of renaming something and kind of reclaiming these horrific things and turning them into a positive. And then I'm also thinking of in the Homeric stories, one of the things that stood out to me was this idea that it's so important to welcome the stranger, and that you welcome them into your household and you give them all. So that this interpretation just clicks in a way for me, because it seems like it's a very positive message.
Well, I think it is, and I think that it ties these less noted elements of the play all together. For example, the songs of the Erinyes and how they're structured, or why Aeschylus would bring them on stage at all as a chorus. In fact, it was so shocking in his time that it said that, people were terrified and pregnant women gave birth. I mean, these were not figures that anybody would be accustomed to see on stage. In fact, non-human choruses are not a feature of tragedy, they're a feature of comedy. So he was breaking all the rules. And we don't have anthropomorphic images of the Erinyes until after the premiere of the Oresteia. So there, of course, a lot doesn't survive from the ancient world, but there is an idea that I find very persuasive, that in fact they didn't have anthropomorphic notions of the Erinyes until Aeschylus brought them on stage and said, look, they could look like this, because they were fearsome deities who lived in the shadows. They were, sort of overseeing human activity from a distance. These were not deities you wanted to get to know, right? Because in the tradition before Aeschylus, they didn't have the power to bless. They didn't do that. They were strictly punishers.
Right, those sort of primeval hunting dogs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, as you're talking about it, I'm remembering reading. I read an English translation. Unfortunately, I don't read the original Greek, but I remember reading that the song, the chorus that they sing, the very first one, and it is wild. I mean, even in the English translation, the meter is weird. They're saying all these crazy things. It's very hard to decipher. And then this ending song is like, it's beautiful. It's harmonious.
Opposite.
Right.
The complete opposite. So I'm curious, which translation did you read?
I can't remember off the top of my head. After the podcast, I'll find it for you. And
I mean, I have a pretty big collection of different translations, and I have some that I like more and I like less. But I'm glad that you found one that brought that out in the binding song, because that's so important, and different translations do that to differing degrees. So I'm really glad you found one that made that very clear, because in the Greek it is very clear, and it is very important, and it is one of the reasons why I also argue that we should really see this and interpret it as a performance, right? We can't afford to ignore the musical elements. We can't afford to ignore the elements that would have been just right in front of you on stage.
So
Because
yeah, that's a part of this that we haven't even touched really, because I'm coming at this being a classical musician by trade, and the importance of how you harmonize something. I mean, if you watch a movie, you know, half of the movie is this soundtrack in terms of the emotional content and what it's telling you about the scene, and that's the one part that we don't have for these plays, or to a great degree at least. So
no, we don't have it, although we do know it existed.
right.
Because there's an element of music that survived for Euripides' Orestes. So we do know that ancient tragedies and comedies were accompanied by music, and that these choral interludes were sung. This is extremely important. Opera was actually invented as a way to sort of bring back ancient Greek theater. So if you're sitting at home and wondering, well, how do I picture this? Picture it like an opera, because operas have choruses, the dialogue is usually sung, the stories can be often very fantastic. They're not always, but often they are. And it's a really good way of just trying to conceptualize this, because otherwise, you know, Greek theater is quite strange. It's from a very different culture.
Well, that's one of the things which is hard to visualize now, because when we look back at ancient Greece, we see, you know, ruins and even things like the statues. You have these very austere statues that used to be painted with vibrant colors. So the sort of vibrancy is hard to bring back. But that's
hard. It's hard to capture, but it's not impossible. And one of the main ways that in my work I tried to emphasize it is by pointing out over and over and over again, the Erinyes are a chorus on purpose. They're a chorus on purpose. What do choruses do? They sing. So if we want to know what or who the Erinyes are, what they represent, we have to listen to them sing. How do they sing? And the fact that the way that they sing and what they sing about changes so radically from the beginning of the play to the end. And Eumenides is a fairly short play, I think should really guide our interpretation of the play. And we shouldn't just say, well, it's not really convenient for my worldview, or it's not really convenient with the way I understand these other things. I think we should try to take everything together. It doesn't mean you have to like it. I like it, which is why I've written so much about it, although most of that is still unpublished. But you don't have to like it, and you don't have to agree that Orestes should be set free or any of that. But what's important to remember, I think, is that at the core of this, at the core of tragedy, is communal performance, communal choral performance. We don't exactly know who invented tragedy. Of course, Aristotle lays out his timeline of tragedy, but there's a reason to take that with a couple pounds of salt. We don't even know quite how tragedy came to be called tragedy. In Greek, of course, it means goat song. This is extremely obscure. People really don't know quite what that means. It's associated with Dionysus. That makes sense. But other than that, there's a lot about the beginning of tragedy we don't know. Thespis is just this sort of puted founder of tragedy. We don't know if he existed. But we do know that Aeschylus existed, and we do know that there was a tragic festival called the Great Dionysia. We have the records of that. But all of this grew out of communal choral performance, and choral performance was musical. So this is a musical phenomenon. These are not books, right?
Right. No,
In
it's about, I mean, at the core of it, it seems like it's about making harmony in both
it
the
is
literal and metaphorical sense.
it
And
absolutely is. At least I think Eumenides is, the Oresteia is. Now, you mentioned the name of the play. The name of the play does not survive from ancient times. It was given the name Eumenides by Byzantine librarians who were putting all of these things in order and cataloging them in their library catalog. It does mean the kindly ones. It's the idea is either they didn't want to talk about the Erinyes directly, and they gave them, like you said, a more positive name to avoid mentioning evil things. This is cross-culturally extremely common also in Arabic when we're talking about pre-Islamic times, and even later in different folk traditions. You don't say things that are ill-omened or might bring you bad luck or summon dark beings. You just don't want to mess with that. The other idea is that the Eumenides is the cult name given to the Erinyes once they join Athena in Athens and make their home there. There's an interesting tie-in that the scholar Winnington Ingram, whom I admire a great deal, he connected the end of the Oedipus at Colonus with the ending of Eumenides, because the Oedipus at Colonus is, Oedipus has blinded himself and he's being guided by his daughter, right? And he is searching for someone or somewhere, something to ease his suffering, because even though he's blind, he still knows who he is and what he did, and he can't really live with himself. At the very end of this play, he's invited to come into what is called the Garden of Eumenides in Athens, and it is in this garden that he is able to give up his ghost, basically, and find rest, peace, die, be welcomed into this garden by the Eumenides. And Winnington Ingram wrote a very interesting and I think a very persuasive article to the effect that these Eumenides in this grove are Aeschylus's Erinyes.
Oh, wow.
In their new home in Athens. So they're inviting in this figure, Oedipus, who has no society, right?
Right. He's been wandering for years or something.
Right. Because of who he is and what he has done, he's completely cut off from community. He has his daughter, but his daughter is as tainted as he is. He doesn't really have anything. He's no longer a king. He's no longer a husband. He's no longer anything. And so the idea, Winnington Ingram says, is this is Sophocles' way of endorsing Aeschylus's idea of what the Erinyes become and what they can do. That is, that the Erinyes really are figures in Athens that can bless and that can bring you in from that complete social isolation that Oedipus is suffering from and rehabilitate you, if you like.
It's hard to consider it now because we're so globally connected, but the role of ostracization in older societies, that's a really powerful effect on the psyche, and so this message of kind of welcoming them into the community, it's a beautiful message. Listen, we've done almost an hour and a half or more just on this topic. We haven't even touched the Nabati poetry.
Well,
So
I can give you 2 sentences on that.
okay.
Basically, when I defended my thesis, I came with all these ideas about music and song and reciprocal social relationships and being invited into communities again and seeing this all on stage. And if you were, watching this on stage and you saw the Arinyas sing like this and you saw them in their purple robes, you'd understand and it wouldn't be ambiguous. Well, they gave me the degree, but you can tell whether people are convinced or not. And I knew that my committee thought that I'd made a good argument, but they weren't really convinced. And so I thought, well, I wonder if there's a different way of looking at this. I wonder if I can find a living tradition of sung poetry or poetry in performance that deals with similar issues, social issues, and so that it's not just theoretical, it's not just this article versus that article, that it's something performed. And I did what every good millennial does. I went online and I started Googling, and I found Nabati poetry. I found it from the internet. I found Dr. Saad Sawayan's book, Nabati Poetry, and I read that. And I also saw on YouTube a lecture that he had recorded where he sets out that there are many different points of contact, that is, similar themes like the guest and the host that you brought up earlier, or bringing somebody in from the outside, or the person who, for whatever reason, is disconnected from his larger society, maybe because of his birth or because he killed someone. All of these things, in fact, you can find in Nabati poetry. And it does still exist. It is still alive. Obviously, the elements that have to do with political issues that affected the Bedouin are no longer being composed. Nabati poetry does still exist in the modern world, but the Bedouin are a settled people. So it deals with more specific issues, human issues, not social issues. Although in some ways, actually, they deal with social issues, just not in the same way. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at that, and I just want to show other scholars from my background or Western backgrounds or classical backgrounds that there's a lot to look at here in terms of how we can understand performance and community, and how you could create a community or create a relationship or strengthen a relationship in performance, and these kinds of things that I was looking at in humanities. And the interesting point about the poem that I read at the beginning was, of course, this is a person who, in forging a relationship with, we assume, a man, has done something that might isolate her from her society. That is, her veil is without its beads now. So this idea of different kinds of social relationships and the balance between them, this is something that I think these two poetic traditions capture in a really immediate way that people can relate to. And it's something that I want to explore, and I could talk for days about this, but that's the way that I can tie it all up.
That's excellent, and this is extremely fascinating to me. So I want to dive into it, but I want to be respectful of your time, and
well, we don't want to overwhelm our listeners.
Yeah, that's
how many people would listen to a 3-hour podcast?
Would you be interested in coming back on to explore that in depth?
Oh, absolutely. I'm working on a paper actually that I'm arranging to give on a platform on Twitter. I think it's called Academics in Quarantine, and basically if you have a paper that you want to give, you sign up with them and present it. So I'm I'm working on this paper that I had written a couple of years ago and put aside because it had gotten rejected from various places, trying to hash out a few of those connections between ancient Greek poetry and Nahuatl poetry. So once I finish that, I can adapt it for a more general audience and just go through a couple of things. If anyone out there listening is interested, if you go on my Twitter or my Instagram, which Alan said he would plug at the end here, the link in both of my bios is to a site of different things where I talk about what I'm doing. And I have a page of audio links. And on that page of audio links, you will see Dr. Saad Sowayan's lecture, which is on YouTube, that specifically brings out these links between ancient Greek myth and epic and poetry with Nahuatl poetry. And he even talks about the question of Moira. So tune into that lecture if anything was interesting here. He's really the reason why I started this project. So you can find that there.
Valerie, thank you so much for doing this. This has been a totally fascinating discussion for me. If you want to find Dr. Valerie Smitherman, she is on Twitter at drvhsmitherman and on Instagram at Dr_Valerie. That's DOCTOR_Valerie. And tune into the next episode, and we hope to have you back on. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.